So folks, we are streaming live on Facebook. The technology is real. It's here. It's happening. Um, I'll just say hello real quick. Pastor Michael Jeanette, Assistant to the Bishop for Formation and Communication in the Southeastern Synod. And I thank Pastor Andrew and Olivia for gathering us together tonight. So I'll turn it over to the two of you and you all can take it from here. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Rickel. I'm the Lutheran pastor called to Grace House, which is the campus ministry kind of in the metro Atlanta area around Georgia Tech, Georgia State, and all that. Reverend John Turo is on as well this evening. I don't know if you want to say hi, John, and introduce yourself since you're a part of this whole
sure.
as well.
Yeah, so I'm at Tyson House Campus Ministry at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. It's a shared Episcopal and Lutheran and whoever else shows up ministry. We're doing that for a little while.
Excellent, yeah.
And I'm taking notes for my students that, like, I don't know, maybe they'll come on, but they seem pretty stressed, so I think there's a fair chance they won't, and I will take good notes and share.
Excellent, yeah.
Great.
And we are recording this and all that this evening as well, so there will be the video option later that we can post a place as well. But
absolutely,
yeah. So I always think one of the coolest things about doing campus ministry and all that is that every year we have somebody from Young Adults and Global Mission come and visit us and tell us about their experience, to share a little bit about what the church is doing abroad and what this program is like. And I must say, when, we were staring down this fall and with COVID and all that, I was sad thinking that our YAGM person wasn't gonna be able to come and visit us this year. But then thankfully, Olivia reached out to me saying, well, hey, I'm your person and let's figure out something to do. So we put together this Zoom Facebook Live event for this evening. Blessed to be able to share it with the Southeastern Synod, with Tyson House and all that. And so, Olivia, I'll leave it to you. So glad you be here with us. Thank you for taking time out of your evening and coming in and sharing some good news about YAGM with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here with y'all. So thanks so much, for inviting me to chat with you guys this evening. Yeah, I'm super excited to have some fellow YAGM alum here as well. So my name is Olivia Slagle, like Pastor Andrew said, and I am currently the East Coast short-term recruiter for the Young Adults and Global Mission program. So I served with Young Adults and Global Mission in the 2019-2020 service year, and I was part of the cohort in Jerusalem and the West Bank. So that was sort of my piece of the YAGM puzzle, and so that's where most of my experience with the program comes from. And so in just a minute, I'm going to share my screen, and I have a little presentation that sort of balances some logistics of the program and what it's about, for all of us watching, and then also some of my own experience and what that meant to me as well. And then at the end, I'll have some time for questions, whether that's questions from y'all or if we have questions in the comments on Facebook, I would be happy to answer those as well. And so my presentation is also like part discussion. So I am going to share my screen, but there's a couple like discussion questions in there. If y'all want to jump in with some ideas while we're talking about that, that would be awesome. So I am going to go ahead and share. All right. So as I said, I am the short-term recruiter currently for the East Coast region. So obviously, as you can tell from our setup tonight and from the general state of things, recruiting has looked a little different this year, but I have been lucky enough to visit with a lot of groups virtually, and that's been a great blessing. So we're going to jump right in with a little bit of discussion about what is a missionary, like what does that mean? And so I would love to hear from you all some of what you think are like important aspects of being a missionary, or what are some like conceptions that we have about missionaries, be they positive or negative, that we think are kind of out there.
This is Pastor Michael. I'll say one, I guess, aspect of a missionary is one who carries the gospel with them to wherever they go.
So this is Emily. I think thinking about missionary as a whole, I think in a positive sense, it's sharing God's love and grace through your actions and not only just words. And in a negative sense, a term white savior comes to mind, where people don't necessarily accompany the group that they are trying to witness to, and they don't walk with the group of people that they are interacting with.
I'll jump in too. Why not? This is John. I think at some level, a missionary is somebody who's sent by the church from one place to another place to go be with people and in some sort of, Christ-centered way. And it does seem like the understanding has changed a lot to more of a model of accompaniment and going and recognizing that Christ is already where you are going, and going to sort of honor and affirm what God's already doing amongst people. But for sure, there's a lot of history of going to sort of presuming that your culture is the culture, and I'm here to acculturate you and bring you our marvelousness so you too can be less marvelous than we are, but better than you were. And then there's a whole lot of negative colonialist stuff that was attached to it that I think we've been repenting of for a while now, is my sense of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of you definitely like hit the nail on the head about what I'm going to go into next, which is just talking about like both this beautiful aspect of mission and feeling called by God from one place to another to accompany, to walk with, to share the message through word and through action. But it comes along with this baggage of this history that carries a lot of negative, a lot of the harmful impact that mission, specifically Christian mission, has had on the world, including the history of colonialism and this idea of forced conversion, or like a coercive evangelism will help you if you will convert, if you'll be baptized, whatever. And this idea that I think Emily brought up of like white saviors and like this idea of, or like, this idea that Westerners, particularly white Westerners, are going into other places, particularly in the global South, in order to fix something, or like, I think Pastor John said, acculturate you, like to take on, aspects that we have deemed superior about our own culture. And the thing about all of these models of mission is that they position us and God on one side, and then the people who we are going to on the other side of some barrier, and this idea that we have to bring God to them. But as you said, this is something that the church has been working towards repenting of this old model that separates us further from God, really, to this new model that recognizes Christ's work that's already happening all over the world, and that by bringing our stories together with folks who we meet through mission, we are just seeing a bigger picture of God's story that includes all of us. So that's the model that YAGM tries to follow, this accompaniment model of walking together in solidarity, in interdependence and mutuality with our global companions who are in a partnership with the ELCA that is mutual, that is meant to be a give and take of different ideas and understanding and help and grace. And so this is sort of the model that we're striving towards, and that often, just like in all of our work in the church, sometimes we fall short, but this is what we hope for our mission to look like today. So Young Adults in Global Mission, thinking about it through this accompaniment framework, is essentially a year-long service learning experience for young adults who are between 21 and 29 years old. And there's a variety of placements and experiences that come within that. So, there's 10 different country programs And even within those, there's a variety of areas that our partners and Global Mission have decided are places where volunteers can grow themselves and can provide something that helps them learn and that helps the communities that we're serving. And so that's a huge spectrum, from education to community development to congregational ministry to human rights to healthcare. There's a lot within that that is very unique and individual to each program and to each YAGM's experience. So my experience within that, I already told you that I served in the Jerusalem and the West Bank program. So in that program, I lived in Beit Jala, which is a little town very close to Bethlehem. And I lived with a host family there who were like my #1 advocates during my time in Palestine. And not only did they share their home with me, but they also shared a lot with me, including instruction on how to live and get around, and just an abundance of patience with everything from like learning how to use money to learn how to speak Arabic. They were with me every step of the way and helped me through a lot of that hard transition period, especially in the beginning. My service in the West Bank was in an educational ministry of our global companions in the region, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. So they have several Lutheran schools that operate throughout the West Bank. And I served at Dar al-Kalima School in Bethlehem. And there I worked as an English teaching assistant alongside a Palestinian English teacher. And I worked primarily with students in the 6th through 10th grades. So Miss Lisa was the teacher who I worked with, and she helped me learn a lot about what it's like to be a teacher. And so I did a lot of different stuff for her, all the way from like copying and helping her type out materials to, planning certain lesson plans some weeks, or taking groups of students on my own to work with them on specific English topics. And I also ran an after-school English club for my 9th grade students, which was great as well. I also had the opportunity a couple days a week to serve in the office of Reverend Mitri Raheb, a Palestinian theologian. And so I worked with him doing a variety of different things at the college, sometimes like editing English materials, and sometimes writing short stories about the students at the college that were then able to go out in different newsletters and stuff to their English speaking partners. And then the last piece of this placement for me was my home congregation in the West Bank. So I attended the Lutheran Church of the Reformation in Beit Jala, which was just a very quick walk from where I lived. And so I worshiped weekly there with the congregation, which is actually the oldest congregation in the ELCJHL, and was a wonderful place for me to experience the beauty of hearing familiar liturgy and songs in an unfamiliar language, and learning what that's like, and working through going from not knowing anything to the first day that I realized I could understand pieces of the sermon, and what a beautiful journey that was as well. This is a map of the West Bank. You can see Bethlehem right here, and Beit Jala is actually so small that it's not even on this map. I couldn't find a map that had Beit Jala on it, but it would be right here, just north of Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem. These are some pictures of some of the people in my community in Palestine who are super important to me. This is my host family. This is us on Christmas morning. This is my cohort. So these are the other women who are serving with me in the West Bank. This is my host brother, Richard, who's a chef, teaching me how to make Palestinian desserts. And these are some teachers who worked at the school with me and with Anna, who was another YAGM volunteer. And so I wanted to, bring up these pictures just because, I told you about what I did, but obviously the most important part of my experience was the people who I met. And that was what was so impactful for me. Was not necessarily, all of it was very, very impactful. And a lot of times I get questions about like, What was it like to learn a lot of things from scratch, which I did? What was it like to try to learn another language? Like, what was it like to visit all these holy sites? All those things were amazing and were, a really great and transformative experience for me. But the part that made the most lasting impact on me were the relationships that I was able to build. And that was what stood out for me beyond, any other sort of experience that I could have had visiting the Holy Land. And that was something that really hit me at Christmas. And so I want to tell you a little story about that. And it revolves around this person right here, whose name was Suhail, Ustaz Suhail. Ustaz just means teacher. And he was another teacher at the school where I worked. And he was the teacher who actually drove me to school every day. He lived very close to my host family's house. And so every morning he would drop off his wife at the bus station that was right across from my apartment and pick me up. And it was at like 6:45, which was so early because that was the time that she had to catch the bus. So we would always like ride to school together. It's very early in the morning. He has 4 sons, and usually some assortment of the sons were there depending on who had class that day and whatever. And then we would always be the first ones at school because like school didn't start until 7:30. And so like we over the year got to know each other really well. And he pointed out different landmarks to me around Bethlehem and really helped me get to know my way around the city. And he taught me a lot of different Arabic songs that we would listen to. And he told me a lot of stories about his family and his childhood and their experiences in the West Bank. And so we really developed what I felt like was a great friendship during my time there. And just before Christmas, before the long Christmas break that we had from school, he asked me if I wanted to spend New Year's Eve with him and his family because they always had like a huge New Year's Eve gathering with all of his siblings and his parents and their spouses and their children. And so I was super excited about that. And it turned out to be a very classic Palestinian gathering where no one was surprised that like this random American was there. They were all super welcoming and like there was so much food. I was fed like 3, 4, 5 times. I was like, please, I can't eat anymore. They were like, no, you have to. And so it was just like, a very wonderful end to, well, not really end because there's many Christmases, but it was a wonderful moment in this holiday season that had me thinking a lot because around Christmas, Bethlehem was just inundated with, tourists and other pilgrims who were coming to the Holy Land for this really important time. I got to meet a lot of them and talk to people who were coming in and out of the city. And it was great to get to meet some other folks from around the world and talk to them about why this pilgrimage was so meaningful to them. But at that moment, at that New Year's Eve party, along with some other moments like singing with my choir that I had joined and opening presents with my host family on Christmas Eve, it just struck me how meaningful it was to have gotten to know people in this community and to be visiting this incredibly holy place and not only get to see the holy sites and to have that part of a sort of pilgrimage, but also to get to know some of the holy people who live there now and to get to see some of the things that make the city holy, not just 2,000 years ago, but today, and how that continues with the really wonderful people who call Bethlehem their home. These are some more people. This is my host nephew, Wael, who is one of my favorite people who I met while I was there. We had great conversations. He's like 2, so actually by the end, we spoke about the same level of Arabic. He understood a lot more Arabic than I did, but we could he could only say a few words, so we were really neck and neck. But he was a great friend to me. And here are some of my students at the annual Olive Harvest Festival. And these are my 9th grade students modeling some traditional Palestinian clothes at that festival, which was really awesome. And then these are some of the teachers at the school where I worked. This was our Christmas party on the day before Christmas. So this was my very particular YAGM experience. There were 6 of us who were part of the Jerusalem West Bank cohort, and each one of us had a very different experience. And yet there were other people all over the world who had an experience that was even more different than that. And so there's some pictures here of some current recruiters and past recruiters, and they've all had just widely different experiences from me with this program. However, the thing that connects all of them was this shared experience of getting a bigger picture of what God looks like by expanding our worldview, by expanding our like cross-cultural understanding, and just by being part of something where your main goal, your main focus is building those relationships and taking the time truly to get to know other people and to hear more about their story. And it was a huge privilege to get to be part of the lives, even for a short time, of the people who I knew in Palestine. And they're very, very important to me. And so it's been a blessing not only to have widened my worldview by that much, but also to know people who served in other places like Mexico and Madagascar and Australia, places that I don't really know that much about, but that I've learned about through the stories of other YAGM. And so getting to hear about, you know, Kara's host mom and Jamie's host brother and what they meant to them, and see a little bit into their world. So obviously, I think that the YAGM program is amazing, but there are a lot of benefits, both for those who are involved in it and, you know, for the church and our world, especially in a time like this. You know, the ELCA's goal through this program is to develop servant leaders for the church and the world through this understanding of getting a bigger view of God's kingdom, and also learning how being a leader can come through humbling yourself and through serving others. And as I mentioned before, sharing stories with each other and beyond of the global church and the global community is a really big way to develop these like cross-cultural ties and to maintain these relationships on a global scale that help us understand that while the center of our world may be our country, our state, our town, because that's our perspective and our experience, which is totally normal, but that's not all that's out there. And that we aren't necessarily the center of God's world, that all of God's children are important to God, and that we are important to each other, and that developing that global community helps us more fully realize God's kingdom on earth. So these are the country programs that we currently have and as part of the YAGM program. And well, I'll talk a little bit about COVID-19 at the end, but these are the 10 country programs that actually span 12 countries. So in the Americas, there's a program in Mexico, and then a program in Argentina, Uruguay, which is one program over those two countries. In Europe, we have the United Kingdom program, and then the Central Europe program, which is Hungary and Serbia. On the African continent, we have Senegal, Rwanda, and Madagascar. In Asia, our programs currently are Jerusalem and the West Bank, and Nepal, which is our newest program. And then Australia is our last program. So I always just like to run through costs a little bit because this is a question that I get a lot. But the ELCA essentially pays $15,000 for each YAGM volunteer for 1 year of service. So that includes airfare and also housing, basic needs, and a small stipend. And so like that can also include things like folks who live with host families who provide housing to them and feed them. Those host families receive money for that. So that's sort of where that money goes. The fundraising expectation for each volunteer yourself is $5,000. However, it's not a barrier to service. So if you're unable to raise the $5,000 for whatever reason, that's not something that would ever prevent the ELCA from sending you as a volunteer. And then there is other financial assistance through the program, including like loan deference for those who are coming out of college with student loans. So the application for this year has actually just opened very recently on November 1st. And so that application will be open for a while. This actually says February 15th, but this year our application deadline is January 15th because we're not doing the priority deadline. It's just January 15th is the closure of that application. And then from there, there's a round of phone interviews before like final placements. And typically the service year runs from August to late June, early July of the following year. So I promised I would mention COVID-19 and what that has looked like for the YAGM program and what that looks like now. So I mentioned before that the YAGM program is typically 11 months. However, the 2019-2020 cohort returned a little early from service because of complications worldwide due to COVID-19. So we actually returned right at the end of March. And this year, the YAGM program is taking a sabbatical because it is not safe for volunteers to be out right now. So this YAGM has actually been going on for 20 years without sort of a break and a way to review some things about the program. So this was an unintentional Sabbath, but it is one that is being utilized to review the program with Global Mission and our global partners, and to see what that can mean for the program going forward in terms of, you know, changing some things that haven't been working, or, you know, picking up some things that have been working and focusing on those things, and to review with our partners, you know, is this partnership still working for you? Because that's something we always want to think about is like, Dan, who's our program director, calls it the like colonial default to just stay somewhere because you've always been somewhere. And so that's something that we're always trying to avoid is that. And so we're always in conversation with our global partners to make sure that this partnership is something that they want to maintain as well as we want to maintain it. So next year, Global Mission is planning to send a YAGM cohort. So the application is open and we are accepting applications, and the hope is that by August of 2021, it will be safe to send folks out. However, Global Mission doesn't know anything that anybody else doesn't know. So, you know, yeah, the YAGM program is very committed to keeping their volunteers safe. And so we'll be keeping applicants updated every step of the way about what service might look like next year. But beyond that, something I always mention now is that a lot of people use YAGM as a post-grad opportunity and do YAGM as soon as they've graduated from college, but that is not a requirement. You're eligible for the program until you're 29, and so many people have an experience doing YAGM later, which is a wonderful experience. And you know, a program like this can mean something different to you at 26 than it would at 22. And so just keeping that option in mind as well. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and just see what questions people might have either about YAGM in general or about my experience or anything you want to talk about.
I have one, Olivia.
Right.
For those of you that don't know, I also served with Olivia and I served in Mexico. So this is going to be a very YAGM question. What has been the hardest thing since coming back?
Yeah, a lot of things. I think that the hardest thing since coming back, wow, okay, actually, so I'm going to remove this from like COVID time.
Yes, minus COVID.
Fair enough. Like, yeah, besides coming back in the middle of a very challenging time for everyone, I would say that the hardest thing, like personally, just about returning from YAGM has been feeling, yeah, this disconnect from people who I was like super close to during my time in service. So just, you know, the natural distance that comes with an 8-hour time difference, you know, that comes with thousands and thousands of miles of physical distance. And so luckily, many of the people who I've met during my time in YAGM, like, have become lifelong friends, who I do talk to regularly. And, you know, I'm very lucky to have a wonderful host family who I'm still in contact with, but there is a distance that comes with that physical gap. And so it's been hard, especially, like I said, I wasn't going to talk about COVID, but having to leave in such a hurry and so unexpectedly has made those goodbyes feel really raw for a long time. And I think it was hard, especially to come back and to have had such a powerful experience, and then to feel like there's no way for me truly to convey what that was like. And also to have lived in a place that's so community oriented, and to have done a lot of work to come out of my sort of like individual shell and to like try to grow into this community and understand a more like communal way of life. And then to come back and immediately have to be like isolated because of events. So actually I said I was going to take COVID out of it. That's impossible. So like that's been the hardest thing. It's coming from like a huge community setting, being around people all the time and just feeling what a gift that really is. And then coming back and being alone in my little COVID bubble. But so yeah, that's been tough. But it does reflect that there was something very beautiful that I had found in Palestine that made it so hard to leave.
This is Pastor Michael. What would you say YAGM, what impact has this experience had on you in terms of just your vocation, your calling in life, did it kind of affirm the path you were on? Did it change? I know it's different for everybody, but
yeah.
curious.
Yeah, so I actually, one of the reasons that I chose to do YAGM was because I had no idea what I was doing vocationally. And I felt like I was like very lost and I wasn't sure what I was feeling called to. And so I was like, you know, maybe this will help me with some of my discernment. And like, I think that, you know, I've heard this is a very powerful experience and like whatever. So that was part of the reason that I chose to do YAGM after leaving college. And it was very powerful. You know, I knew I liked working with children and I did. I really enjoyed teaching and things like that. But actually, I think the biggest impact it made on me regarding vocation was the other reason I wanted to do YAGM was because I was graduating college and I felt like I wanted to do something that was going to like make an impact, you know, like something that was going to be like good and like a net positive and stuff like that. And so, yeah, you know, I think I definitely found that with YAGM, you know, global service is a great way to feel like you're serving something that is bigger than just yourself. But actually what I learned through my experience with YAGM is that like, it's not like there's a set of jobs that are like, these are the good jobs, these are the helping jobs, and then everything else, no. You know, and I mean, I'm not going to go out and like try to be like an oil baron, but like, I just mean that I still think that like most jobs that you can do, the most important aspect that you can do to make it a net positive for the world is what you put into the relationships you build, what you put into the community you're a part of through that job or through where you live, and how you make that job into service, whatever that looks like. And so I met people all throughout the West Bank who were doing a variety of jobs who changed my life just through their actions, you know, whether they were, you know, the man who I bought my bread from every week was super important to me. And like, that was a really wonderful gift that I felt from him. And like, you know, I always looked forward to when I had a little extra money and I needed to take a taxi from somewhere to somewhere else and would get to practice my Arabic and also just to have like a conversation about what that person was like. And actually the Lutheran schools in the West Bank are pretty popular. So often I would run into an alum of the Lutheran schools and talk to them. And so like, these were people who demonstrated a great welcome to me and made a big difference to me through whatever their vocation was. So I kind of thought that YAGM might give me a very clear path, but what it actually gave me was better, which was like the freedom to know that for the most part, whatever path I take, it can still be ministry. Like it can still be a gift to my community.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah. Pastor Andrew here. I have a question from Facebook. Amanda Clausen just asked on Facebook was it difficult being away from family during the holidays, or did you find that the atmosphere and events in Jerusalem made up for missing out on normal traditions?
That's an amazing question, actually. And I made like a series of like Instagram posts about this at Christmas last year, because like at one point I felt so guilty because yeah, I was in Bethlehem, I was in Jerusalem, it was Christmas, it was amazing. You know, like that's something that like many people dream of getting to do, you know, including me. And it was amazing. The atmosphere was incredible. You know, they have a lot of traditions and festivals that span like over a month long period. Like it was really incredible. And so yeah, like getting to experience a lot of those new traditions was really amazing. Getting to experience my host family's traditions was amazing. Their Christmas parties, you know, I felt a huge sense of privilege and belonging just from unpacking someone else's like ornament boxes, you know, and like knowing that another YAGM helped put those ornaments away, and that these are ornaments that had been in these people's family for years, and they were, you know, letting me into that tradition, and that was really amazing. So like at the same time, like that was all super wonderful, and I was very aware of that. But yeah, I miss my mom. Of course I did. And it was really hard. Yeah, it was very hard to be away from my family at the holidays. And I found that like sometimes when I tried to express that, people would be like, oh, but like, don't you see how lucky you are, whatever. And I was like, of course I do. Like, of course I know how lucky I am. But yeah, I miss my mom. I miss my brother. I miss my cats. But it was certainly worth it. And you know, well, it's COVID, but I'll be able to be with them for many years to come, hopefully. But like this experience of having Christmas in Bethlehem and the people who shared their traditions with me last year is something that was certainly worth it, and something that I will treasure for a long time. But yeah, there was many moments through the year where I was homesick, no matter how wonderful the things happening around me were. But yeah, but it was worth it in the end.
Hi, I have a question. I was tuning in on my way home, and so I kind of jumped in as you were talking, but it's so nice to meet you all, especially you, Olivia. I actually did a similar program with the Presbyterian Church, the YAV program, the Young Adult Volunteer Program. And I was in Korea, South Korea, and similar to you, we kind of got evacuated early due to COVID. And so I just wanted to hear about kind of what the biggest difference was culturally in Palestine, and then in contrast, what similarities there were between the culture in the US and the culture you experienced over there, because I think that was something that was so huge for me, and I didn't really recognize how big of a factor that would play into my own experience living as an American in a different country that I had never been to. So just to kind of reflect on that, especially since you're really the first person I've talked to who has lived in Palestine for kind of an extended period of time. Yeah, so however you want to answer that question, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so something, yeah, and I feel like I get this question a lot, and I think I sort of like mentioned already what I feel like was the biggest difference, which is that like, it's just a very communal society, as opposed to the US. And like a lot of times people ask like, oh, what was the biggest thing you learned? And I love that question, because the biggest thing that I learned was how individualistic I am, which is something that I never ever would have described myself as before going. Because like I'm very close with my family. I'm an extrovert. I love having people around. You know, my senior year of college, I lived with 6 roommates. Right now I have 4 roommates. Like I love to be like with people. But I think that just as like a society, in the US, we are very individualistic in the way we go about a lot of things and in where we get our self-worth from in terms of like doing things on our own. And that wasn't something that I recognized in myself until I moved somewhere and I didn't know how to use money. And I didn't know how to like ride the bus. And like, I didn't know how to do anything. I couldn't buy groceries. Like I couldn't go anywhere. And like, I had to ask for help. And I was 23 and I had to start over and like ask for help for every single thing. And like, I was like, oh my God, this is so miserable. Like I came here because I thought I was gonna like do something for someone else. And now everyone's having to do everything for me. Someone had to tell me whether or not I could flush toilet paper. Like, and so like, I think that it was very humbling for me to have to ask for help for everything and to understand that people were happy to give me that help, that I wasn't like a burden on people for needing help, that no one expected me to show up and like be able to speak perfect Arabic day one. And that that was, yeah, like, okay. And so going off of that, you know, in the West Bank, most people I met, like either all their family lived in the same town, like within 5 minutes, or they lived abroad. And part of that is because of the Palestinian diaspora. But, you know, a big part of that is like, okay, so if you haven't immigrated, like if you haven't left because of the occupation, then for the most part, yeah, you live in the same town as your parents, often in the same, you know, compound. Like, you know, there'll be a house and there's 3 floors and each floor is a separate apartment and it's all family. And it's like, why would you leave, you know? And so I think that that was kind of a shift for me mentally growing up, you know, in the US, where people are like, yeah, the second I graduate high school, I'm out of this town and I'm never coming back. And like, that was just like a pretty normal thing for me to think about. And I was like, yeah, that's how it is. And so like meeting people where it was like, no, like, why would you move if you aren't going anywhere? Like, why would I go to a different town? It's the same, you know? And like, you know, my host nephew, Wael, who I talked about earlier, he sees both of his grandmothers every day. And like, that was, I saw that and I was like, I wish I saw my grandmothers every day. Like, what is that? And so like, I think that it really made me question, like, where am I trying to go? And like, I don't think there's anything wrong with like, you know, moving to a different town, wanting to see different things. I graduated college, I left the country. I was like, I got to get out of North Carolina. So like, I understand that. But yeah, it was definitely a shift in thinking from like, I need to leave my hometown just because, to like, maybe it's not so bad. You know, if you have a good relationship with your family, like, you don't have to bail. So I think that that was like a, sorry, my smoke alarm's going off. Hang on.
Hope you are okay and that it is a false alarm.
Okay, it stopped. It was definitely a false alarm. Someone's cooking and that's what it is. Okay, sorry about that. I'm sure that was horrible through your Zoom mic. Yeah, so that's what I would say was the biggest cultural difference. And in terms of like what was like a similarity, yeah, I mean, there was tons and tons of similarities, like mostly, you know, little stuff, but like, yeah, the way the schools were set up was very familiar to me. You know, I think that like a lot about like the cities and how things work was very familiar, you know, public transportation, buses, taxis, like all of that was like very familiar, you know, with the exception of things like open air markets and learning to barter, which was very hard for me, but like, you know, stuff like that was different. But I think that that was the biggest difference, along with the idea of like just leaving open time, you know, like going to see your family. And it's not like I'm going to be here for an hour. It's like, who knows how long we'll be here, you know? And I think that that was, it's a similar like situation to the like individualism versus like communalism sort of idea, but just that like, you don't always have to be in a rush. And that was something that I hope that I've taken back with me, at least a little bit.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I wonder, as you describe this beautiful relational society, this kind of communal thing, and having to leave it a little early, it's okay if the answer is just a straight up no, but do you know how they've adjusted or how they've adapted that to COVID now since you had to go?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I've talked to my host family like a little bit about this, and what that was like. And there's a lot of layers to this, particularly in Palestine. So one of the reasons why our exit was so rushed and so challenging was because of the way the Israeli occupation affects movement in and around the West Bank, particularly for Palestinians, but for others in the area as well. So the first cases in the area were actually discovered in Bethlehem from some tourists who were staying in a hotel there. And that was actually the day we were supposed to leave on our spring retreat. So we were sort of leaving at the time. And so we had gone to Jerusalem. So we were on the outside of the West Bank and of the separation wall. And that night, Israel closed the checkpoints between the West Bank and the rest of the area because they essentially were just imposing like a mass quarantine on the area because there were cases that were discovered there. So at that time, we were on the other side. We were in Jerusalem because we had been planning to go to the north to Galilee for our retreat, which we did for a few days before the Israeli government actually said, if you've been in Bethlehem, you now have to quarantine. So then we ended up quarantining as a cohort in a very small apartment in Jerusalem, which you can ask me about that later if you want. So that's where we were actually until we left, which was very hard because at no point were we able to return to the West Bank to say our goodbyes. And so because of this, actually, those in our community in the West Bank were not able to leave. Many of them are never able to leave the West Bank, but they were not able to leave the West Bank for many, many months. And actually, the checkpoints were just finally opened not very long ago, just a couple months ago. So from being closed since March 8th was when they closed. So that presents one challenge for the community there, sort of an even further restriction on movement other than the restrictions on movement that are already there. And then besides that, there's a lot of challenges relating to hospital infrastructure in the West Bank and what healthcare is and isn't accessible. But besides all those logistical things, getting back to your actual question sort of about the family aspect, the communal aspect, I think it was very challenging. My host sister actually had a baby right when all of this was happening. She was in the hospital and for several days, no one could come see her, even her husband and her mother. So that was really challenging. And then Easter was very soon after that. And, my host family is texting me about that. And they got to see, I think my host sister who is married, they got to see her, but not many other people. When usually on Christmas, we went and visited 10 families. So thinking about your whole extended family on a holiday would typically go visit each other. And so that wasn't possible. So actually now the cases in the West Bank have gone down a lot. So I think people are more able to be back to sort of this, the schools are open again, they are wearing masks, things like that. So I think there's able to be a little more connection. But yeah, it was a lot of challenges, some logistical and some, just having to be at home with just your family, and that disconnect from the extended family, I think was really hard for a lot of people.
Thank you.
Pastor Andrew here. I have another question coming in from Amanda on Facebook, and there might be a few YAGM terminology things in here you might need to explain a little bit or just talk about. But she asked, did you brush up on your Arabic on your own once you knew your placement, or did you feel prepared through the YAGM orientation? So I don't know if talking about placement and orientation might fit into this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So no. So I did not. No and no, I guess. So I in the spring. Oh, bye, Pastor John. In April is when you receive your final placement, which is what Amanda's talking about with the YAGM program. So you, after the written application and interview rounds and then some final interviews, there's like a joint decision between you and some folks on the global mission side, and officially like the YAGM program will put you in what country program they think is best for you. And so in April, I knew that I was going to be going to Palestine in August. And so while we're talking about languages, I'll just say that there is no language requirement for most of the programs except for the Spanish speaking programs. And in those programs, you do have to have some background in Spanish language. Yeah, and it can be like almost nothing, or it can be a lot. But like you just have to have a little something. But the rest of them, you do not have to have any language background. So they told us, however, and this is, I think, particular to Arabic, but correct me if I'm wrong, if the rest of y'all know, that while we were there, we did not learn what's called modern standard Arabic, or like Fusha, which would be like official Arabic. So like written Arabic, for the most part, is like Fusha. And that's like what my students learned in their Arabic classes at school. So that there's like modern standard Arabic, and then every country, and even within those countries, that kind of regionally has their own dialect of Arabic. So while we were there, so I didn't start learning until we were in country. And then during our orientation and also throughout our time there, we had an Arabic teacher. So we took a class that was particularly for internationals living in Palestine who wanted to learn very quickly. So we learned the Palestinian dialect, only spoken Arabic. So like it was really interesting because like the whole time I was there, I was essentially like illiterate. Like I couldn't read signs or anything like that. I learned some of the letters towards the end, but like for the most part, I can't really read or write Arabic, but I can speak enough to be understood in Palestine, and then probably Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, maybe Egypt. But like, you know, the dialects then vary so broadly through the area. But like typically in any YAGM program, you'll have language lessons during your orientation, and then they may continue throughout the rest of your time. But Arabic is really interesting just because it's a completely different letter system. And so like we learned sort of like a shortcut way so that I could get a taxi and order lunch and talk to people in Arabic.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I was wondering, so Cassie put in the chat here. Cassie, do you want to hop on and share that for people on Facebook?
Yeah, so your language requirement for Spanish, it's like 2 semesters of college language is sufficient. One of the girls who was in the Mexico cohort this year, she spoke virtually 0 Spanish and she survived. And she can now have a conversation and get through most situations. So
yeah, Mexico was actually my other like potential placement. So like at the end, you interview with 2 country programs. Mexico was my other one because I do have like a little background in Spanish, but like not a lot. And at this point, honestly, even after I actually had like 4 semesters of college Spanish, and like my conversational Arabic is probably better just because like being immersed is like so much stronger than what you could learn in a classroom.
Hi, I'm Mary Howe. It's nice to meet you. I'm a YAGM alum myself from 2007, 2008. So I always love to hear new stories. And my question is, what was the biggest or just a good example of a misunderstanding that happened while you were there?
Yeah, wow, that's a really good question. There's like a really funny one I can think of, but I don't think I can say it over Facebook. So I'm trying to think of like another one. It's just a language like snafu there. But I guess like a misunderstanding, like in terms of like a serious one. I think, okay, so I think there's a lot of sort of cultural, I think there's a big learning curve in terms of like cultural norms anywhere you're like living in a new place. And so like in both our YAGM orientation, so for like general stuff, and then also in our in-country orientation, we learned a lot, you know, as much as we could about like what, you know, is what you should and shouldn't do and things like that in terms of like in-country. But one of the biggest things that was sort of different was like what invitations mean, you know, and like how to like respond to invitations and things like that. And so this was sort of like a funny this is still a funny misunderstanding, but like first time someone invited me for lunch after church, I was like, oh yeah, like I'm, you know, a Lutheran. I know what like after church lunch is, like, let's go, like whatever, 1 hour potluck. Okay, like this will be great, right? So I go to this one, and she was a member of our congregation, but she was also a teacher at the school where I worked. And she invited me and one other YAGM over for lunch to her house. And so we were like, okay, we'll be here like 1-2 hours. It'll be awesome. We were there until like 10 p.m. after leaving church at like 11 a.m. And so like we got there, and we made lunch with her, which was great. She like taught us how to she let us make the tabbouleh because she said that it was impossible for us to mess it up. So we did that. And like we made lunch with her, and then, you know, we had lunch, and like we waited, and then we had dessert, and then we had coffee, and then we had fruit, and then we had tea, and there was like several, you know, like aspects of like what we're having. And like then she like at one point she like left, and we were like, oh, where'd she go? She comes back, she's wearing pajamas. We were like, all right. So we were just like hanging out in her living room, and like, you know, we spent the whole day there, and we had like a lot of wonderful conversations and got to know her and her husband and her son a lot better. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely like, we thought this was like 9-minute post-church lunch, and we were literally there for like 9 hours. And so then after that, we were like, okay, now we know what like after church lunch means. But, you know, again, it was that same thing I sort of talked about earlier with like, I didn't have anywhere to be. But like, I just think that we're so used to feeling this sense of like urgency, like nothing can take too long, you know? And that was one of my biggest introductions into like, just let go, like of what your schedule is, like what your time restrictions are. I mean, there was times when like another misunderstanding, I guess the first time my host mom was like, we're going to the grocery store, do you want to come? And her sister owned the grocery store that we shopped at. And I was like, okay, going to the grocery store. 30 minutes. We were probably there for like 4 hours, because like we got there and we talked to her sister, we shopped, her parents lived next door, so they came out, we sat out front, talked to the parents, went back in, bought some stuff we forgot, came back out, the kids came out, played with the kids. Like I was like, oh my God, what's happening? And we were like literally there for like 4 hours. Then my host sister and her husband showed up, and they were like, we got to go get our car from the shop. Anyway, it was just like so much happened, but I was like, again, I don't need to be anywhere. Like there's no reason why I can't sit out front of this grocery store for 4 hours and like make conversation with my host mom's mom, who she didn't speak any English. And so she would just speak to me in Arabic, which actually was great, because like at the beginning I like didn't know anything, and she would just like say sentences to me in Arabic, and I'd be like, okay. But like I learned really quickly like how to like talk to her and stuff. So like, yeah, I think I had a lot of misunderstanding of how much time certain things take, but like that was really ended up being really wonderful, because like I didn't have anywhere to be. So
That's really excellent. It's really excellent. So we're kind of coming up on about the hour mark now, and certainly want to be respectful of everybody's time this evening, but also want to make sure if there's any other kind of lingering questions, we can kind of hop in them right now and all that kind of stuff. If anybody has one. Oh yeah, go for it, Molly.
Sorry, you may have talked about this earlier before I hopped on the call, but could you touch on a little bit what you did while you were over in Palestine? I know for YAVs, we were volunteering a lot at other churches with other youth groups or with ministries that churches had, so I didn't know if that was the same for, I think it's YAGM, is that what you call it? It sounds very similar to Yava, and so I was like, whoa. But yeah, just to kind of elaborate a little bit more on what your role looked like over there.
Yeah, absolutely. So with YAGM, Young Adults in Global Mission, we have like a huge variety of like what service experiences might look like. And some of that's based on what country you're in, and some of that's based on, you know, your gifts and what placement works best for you and for the community. And so I did mention this like very early on though, that like there's, you know, some opportunities that are in like congregational ministry, youth ministry, things like that. But then there's also a lot of like educational placements, human rights placements, like placements in community development, and other aspects like that. So what I did was I worked as a Palestinian English teaching assistant. So I was teaching English with a Palestinian English teacher. And so like I basically helped her with whatever she needed, and I got to do some one-on-one stuff with students, and I ran an after-school club for some older students. So that was my main role. And I also worked a couple days a week at the local college that was also associated with the Lutheran Church. And I did some like more administrative work there, and helped out with just some like a lot of materials there that are produced in English. So I just did some like once over for those, just for like English editing and things like that. So that was my main job. I know we have some other YAGM alum here if you want to share like what your job was.
Yeah, I worked, so I was in Mexico, and I worked at an ecological elementary school. So my primary role was teaching English and technology to elementary school students. And then I also took care of some other stuff around the school. I helped in the garden where we grew vegetables for the kids, and the kids took turns every morning coming and helping me in the garden. And then I assisted in the aftercare like activities. So.
Thank you. That's super fascinating. It's just so cool to see the similarities between our two programs, and that we were doing kind of similar work, all to glorify God and make a difference in the world. So that's awesome.
Yeah, so Molly, I was in YAGM several years ago now, but we were doing, at the time, we did orientation and the reentry retreat in combination with the Presbyterian program. So that was cool to get to meet a lot of our Presbyterian, you know, counterparts as part of that experience.
And the current Mexico coordinator, she was a YAV in, I forget which year. So like the Mexico program, because she has connections on the border, we got to do stuff with the YAV program when we were on the border. Mm-hmm.
Were those the Tucson YAVs?
Yep, the
Okay.
Tucson YAVs. Yep.
Very cool. And it's funny, I'm not even Presbyterian, I'm Episcopalian, but my college that I went to, they were like, yeah, you should check out the YAV program. It's really ecumenical, and you know, there's some Elon alum, which is another reason why I feel connected to you, Olivia. I went to school in Elon, so like North Carolina is my second home. So yeah, but I just love the idea of taking a year off to just explore who you are outside of a school setting and not dive into the professional world right away. So that's really cool that you were able to do that. And I'm sorry you kind of had to come back under these circumstances, but I'm sure you created memories and experiences there that you'll always remember, which is definitely what happened for me in Korea. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, because you reminded me to say a couple other things. First of all, that yes, YAGM also, it is a program of the Lutheran Church, but you do not have to be a Lutheran. So thank you that what you said about YAV reminded me of that also. That yeah, this is not an exclusively Lutheran program. So yeah, that is not a barrier for people who are interested in applying. And also, yeah, like exactly what you said about taking time to explore who you are outside of a school setting or a work setting was really powerful for me. And it was also a chance for me to explore what faith means outside of just like a church setting. And so what faith can look like out in the world in action, and also what faith looks like coming from a different context. And a lot of the faith that I saw in Palestine has influenced a lot about the way that I think about my faith now. So. Well, as Pastor Andrew said, yeah, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to throw in the chat a couple links. One of them is to a Google form that you can fill out if you're interested in hearing more from me about this program or about a variety of things. And then the other one is a link to the application, which is now open, and then I'll also just put my email address. If someone is able to put those in the comments of the Facebook Live, that would also be excellent. So that is the Google form. This is the link to where you can find the application, and this is my email address. And I would love to hear from any of you.
I was gonna
Awesome.
say, this sounds right up your alley, Pastor Jeanette. So I'm looking to you.
We'll make sure these get posted on Facebook. We are recording this as well, so it'll end up on our YouTube channel, where I can post the links in the comments there, on our Synod Youth and Young Adult website, on our Synod Youth and Young Adult Facebook page and Instagram. So we're gonna, in a couple of days, we'll send it all out, and just hope to make more and more connections, and direct people to you, Olivia, or to our other YAGM alum in this synod who are in this geographical region of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee. That's our geographical unit, if you will, as part of the ELCA. Yeah, we'll take care of that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Let me try that again. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Wonderful to see all these familiar and new faces. Olivia, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening and joining us here and bringing the good news of what y'all have been working on, and ways in which the church, is doing exactly what for many of us feels like the church should have been doing for a very long time around the world. So thank you for that witness and for your work. We'll be in touch, I guess. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much to all of you for being here. And yeah, please reach out to me anytime about YAGM or about anything. I'd love to hear from y'all. So have a great night. Thanks again.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.